Hey everybody, we're back again, and we're going to take a look at how to model and explain the Keynesian multiplier effect. This is one of those places where the shape of the short-run aggregate supply curve and the Keynesian model assumptions are really, really important. All right, so when we think about the assumptions of this model that are really important, what we really need to think about, this one is the most important, the idea of sticky wages as the most important assumption of this model. And the way that sticky wage theory manifests itself on the model is in this horizontal section of the short-run aggregate supply curve, and that that section of the short-run aggregate supply curve is horizontal because prices and wages will not fall any further. The stickiness or the downward nominal rigidity of those wage rates and those prices creates that horizontal section, all right? And if you see, like as we move our aggregate demand curve along this horizontal section, it doesn't matter which direction we move, price level isn't going to change, and therefore we can make the correlation that wage rates won't change. And that's what we mean by the downward nominal rigidity. Even though this aggregate demand curve is moving leftward, prices and wages stay sticky. Okay, so that's how that sticky wage scenario manifests itself on the Keynesian real economy model. All right, why don't we put a title on this just to be, thorough. So this is our Keynesian real economy. Okay, there we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about the multiplier effect here, okay? And the multiplier effect is sort of the idea of how and why the world of John Maynard Keynes and the theories that he developed are considered to be so useful in this particular scenario. In this particular scenario, we're looking at a demand-side recession, okay? So we can see that our full employment level is over here at our long-run aggregate supply curve. There's our potential output. And we are seeing a short-run equilibrium which falls well short of our full employment level. So we have a recession. The distance between those is our recessionary gap, all right? And we've had some deflation with that because, of course, our price level would be at this equilibrium point up here. Okay, so as we know, the Keynesian model suggests that this real economy can get stuck in this position simply because wages are not going to fall to help clear the labor market of that excess unemployment. So they suggest that demand-side recessions see what I did there, require demand-side solutions, all right? And if you can't get anyone else to spend money, remember, aggregate demand is simply C plus I plus G plus X. If you can't get C or I or X to increase because consumers and businesses are no longer willing and able to spend money, and you can't bump up your export levels, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have the government step in and spend the money. And the Keynesian world basically talks about this idea of getting the free lunch right here, okay? So if we have government spending increases, we're going to see this happen. There's our second aggregate demand curve. That was the increase in government spending that came from the Keynesian world, all right? We can see that clearly our national income has increased, and we have really reduced that recessionary gap. And the reason the Keynesians feel like this free lunch is available to them is the horizontal nature of this segment. So if we look at our new short run equilibrium, we can see that our price level hasn't changed at all. In this particular case, there was no trade-off between price level and national output. We grew our economy at the same price level. And that is where the Keynesians think about this world of the free lunch. Now, the multiplier effect comes from the idea that money just doesn't get spent once. Money gets spent over and over and over again. And so the phrase that is often used to signify this is the idea that one person's spending becomes another person's income. And so one person spends money, that becomes somebody's income, and then that income gets spent again and becomes somebody else's income. And so after multiple rounds of spending, see what we did there? Multiple rounds of spending, creating the multiplier effect. And so what we find is this initial round of government spending will lead to a second and larger increase in aggregate demand because of the multiple rounds of spending. So we're going to see an increasing level of jump the second time around, with the hope that your aggregate demand curve moves out to the full employment level. And in this case, we've moved ourselves into what is called the neoclassical range of the short-run aggregate supply curve. And in that case, we are absolutely going to see that trade-off between increased national income, and now we're going to see that rise in price level because we're in the neoclassical range. So the initial spending is the Keynesian free lunch that they talk about, right? Increased national output, no change in price levels. The multiplier effect is going to bump us up to our additional levels of national income, but as we enter the neoclassical range, we get that classic trade-off between rising levels of national income and rising levels of price. Okay, so that is how you would model the Keynesian multiplier effect, and the Keynesian multiplier effect always has two shifts of your aggregate demand curve, one representing the initial increase in government spending, and then a second increase in aggregate demand that comes from the fact that one person's spending becomes the next person's income. Okay? Excellent.